Welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Randa, and together we are the Sake Sisters. For more information, check out our website at www.switchbladesistersocialclub.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at Switchblade Sisters Social Club.
Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club. My name's Dee, and this is Randa, my sister. Hi. Hi. Oh, well, we're excited because we've got another special bonus for you.
We're very excited because we've got an amazing guest on. So basically, this came about because we went to CrimeCon, and unfortunately, we missed our guest's talk. But I saw a post that he featured in on LinkedIn with Stuart from British Murders, another amazing podcast if you want to check it out. And so I slid into his DMs and I said, hi, I'm so sorry we missed your talk, but just wanted to say hi. And so we had a little convo and the topic of him coming on the podcast arose and it was just an absolute gift. So I bit his hand off, said, Dee, get on it, book him in. Let's get him on. And so basically, our surprise guest today is Steven Keogh, who has spent over 30 years in the London Met Police and over 15 years of those as a Scotland Yard detective. And you know how much we love a Scotland Yard detective. And he has investigated over 100 murders. He worked on the Scotland Yard anti-terrorist branch during the London bombings on 7th of July, 2005. And Steven is currently working with businesses as a public speaker, speaking to them about how techniques and skills used in crime investigations can be directly applied and applicable to business. So I'm really interested to hear about all of that. And he's got another surprise he wants to talk about, which I will let him introduce. But he's a lovely guy and a very interesting guy.
I know. I'm so excited. All right. So on that note, let's let him in. So we've got Steve. Steve, do you prefer Steven or Steve?
Steve. Yeah, Steven's like my stage name. Steve's what everyone else calls me.
I just wanted to say that I had to laugh and / be a bit offended because when my sister told me that you had agreed to come on the podcast, she told me to get in touch with you and she was like, don't scare him off.
I said, be professional, Dee. And that is going by your, let's say, interactions with our other favorite detective, Colin Sutton.
Do you know what? I was going to put a timer on. I was going to count how long it was going to be before you mentioned Colin's name, and it was quicker than I thought.
We mention him every episode. He's like a recurring theme.
I don't know if you saw, but we made fan merch. Colin Sutton Fan Club t-shirts.
And it emerges that Deanna is in fact the real manhunter.
She hunted him down, did she?
Yes, I
did. She did.
But yeah, so I was like, I'll try not to scare the former homicide detective with my ways. And here you are. So I
you're going to take a lot to scare me. Trust me, you're fine. You're fine.
It normally takes a lot more coercion to get high-profile guests like you on our podcast. So if you could just confirm that you're not here under duress for our listeners.
If you could just untie me now, please.
He's actually recording from my basement. So we always send our questions to our guests in advance. And then you replied that we had sent you some questions that you'd never had before. And we were like, is that good? Are we asking stupid questions or insightful questions?
No, it was really good questions. I mean, yeah, you were proper deep diving, weren't you? It wasn't superficial. It was. No, I was impressed.
What we lack in qualifications, we make up for in intensive research, sometimes called cyber stalking, but we call it research.
We always say that Deanna deserves an honorary PhD in criminology because she's got a serious detective brain.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
If any polytechnics want to honor me with a doctorate, I'll make a fabulous thank you speech, et cetera, et cetera.
You're not going for Ivy League then, just a polytechnic.
I'm being realistic, but any Ivy Leaguers out there, sure, that'd be great. Well, we're here. We've got you on for a couple of reasons. One, because we're obsessed with everything that you do. And two, because you've got a new book out and we're so excited about it. I have to say, the moment you sent it to us, just getting like a preview of a book in itself was just like
exciting.
So exciting.
Yeah, you're the first interview I've done. I've got a few lined up, and like my publishers will be getting things lined up, and you're the first people I've spoken to about it. So,
do you know, we're so flattered. And as soon as we got it, we were like, whoa. So we dove into it straight away.
I mean, obviously, being true crime enthusiasts, living in London, it's one that you can't avoid, and we don't want to because we're fascinated by it. I've been to the Trinity Bell recently, which is one of the last like pubs that one of the victims had been into the night that she was murdered. Yeah, so tell us about the book. We've given away some clues about what it's about. So
it's about Jack the Ripper. It's a modern day look at it. So the premise is, how would it be investigated if it was to happen today, and how does that compare with what went on back in 1888 and the detectives then? And at the same time, what I'm trying to do is look at three questions, which is, which crimes did he commit? Because there's a bit of controversy over how many he did. Why did he do it? What was his motivation? And the last one is, who was he? And is there anything I can do? Bring in a modern day investigative approach to those questions to try and answer them.
And I see it as kind of a sequel to this book.
Yeah.
I'm holding up Murder Investigation Team, How Killers Are Really Caught, where you go into, like, it gives such insight on how an investigation is actually conducted. And then you seem to have, like, you talk about it in depth, which is so fascinating. And then the Jack the Ripper book, it's like you're applying these techniques onto this quite old case.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
But this book, there was one line that I really took to heart, because I think that we are guilty of also being a bit judgy sometimes about how cases are handled. And sometimes they are handled incredibly badly.
Yeah.
And we're right to be judgy. But there was a line in there where you said lawyers, and I've put in brackets, and true crime podcasters would have months to second guess decisions that we have to make on the spot. So I just thought that was a really, really interesting point to highlight. And we will be mindful of that, won't we, Randa?
Completely.
We have been accused of being a bit judgy.
Oh, we only had one negative review.
Which we can't get over.
Can't get past it. And it was
what did they say?
Just that we got to get off our high horse.
All right, look, you can't please everyone, can you?
But to be fair, Steve, the topic of that episode was hybristophilia.
That's when people actively seek relationships with people in prison.
Right.
And, you know, like we always say, not just, oh, my partner's gone to prison and I'm standing by them, but, you know, the type that actively look for pen pals and romantic relationships, like this woman who's marrying Levi Belfield. What?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And we wanted to cover it because we are fascinated by it and we do not understand it. So we looked at studies, you know, by professionals who know more than us. And, you know, some of the conclusions were that probably these people have suffered some kind of trauma, have some sort of confidence issues, et cetera, et cetera. And we had one person, Randa, you know it verbatim, don't you?
Something along the lines of get off your high horses.
She said, I'm a hybristophiliac and I have not suffered trauma or have confidence issues.
Debatable.
We were like, that sounds like someone who has trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't paint everybody with the same brush, can you? Everyone's going to be different. But to do that, there must be something within you that's been affected in some way, that you're seeking a partner in that way. It's not normal, is it?
Well, you put it much more delicately than clearly we did, but we've been mindful of monitoring our language.
Not really. We always say we're not the fucking BBC. We have opinions.
But we're on our best behavior for you today, Steve.
No, listen, at the end of the day, it's your platform, isn't it? And you're going to position yourself how you want to position yourself. And not everybody's going to like it. My book, when I go through the reviews, the negative reviews I look at, they always make me laugh. I don't get upset by them because I know if I'm writing a book, not everybody's going to like it. You think the best book in the world, the best TV program in the world, there's going to be people that don't like it. So you'll just be you.
Sorry, are you saying we're the best podcast?
I think you're definitely the best podcast I've been on today, 100%.
Oh,
I'll take it.
That's going on our socials.
There you go. That's a testimonial for you. Best podcast I've been on today.
But people are going to tune in for you, aren't they? They're going to like you and who you are. And if you're trying to be someone who you're not, then they can't do that. And if people don't like it, then go to listen to some other podcast.
Well, we are lucky that our listeners there's a market for middle-aged judgy bitches, and that's why we're here.
We've tapped right into it. We're there. We've got our support base. So yeah. But what I found so good about this book was that you actually started off with a definition of murder, which I don't even know if I ever thought about.
Yeah.
And you break it down so well. So I'm sure you don't need reminding, but I'll read it out. Where a person of sound mind and discretion unlawfully kills any reasonable creature in being under the Queen's, and I've put in bracket King's
now. But I wrote the book in 21, so yeah, she was alive then.
Peace with malice aforethought. Never said that word out loud. So can you break that down for us? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, it's quite weird, isn't it? So English law, a lot of it is from like centuries ago, and that's one of these cases. That's why the wording is a bit like that. But the reason I put it is like people are fascinated by murder. But if you ask the question, and I did it as when I was writing the book, just some people I know, what is murder and what is manslaughter, and most people didn't know. And it's like, well, it's not that complicated, really. They make it sound really complicated. So if we break it down, so if sound mind and discretion is so that someone's not insane, and then unlawfully kills, so it's not self-defense or a justified killing, say like a police officer shooting a bank robber or something. And then reasonable creature is a human being, so you can only murder a person, you can't murder an animal. In being means the person is born and taken a breath. So if a baby dies in the womb and it hasn't been born yet, that's not murder. So it has to be born and taken a breath.
Oh, well, that's interesting with all the abortion debate and all this, that, and the other, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Under the King's peace it's in peacetime. It's not in an act of war. And then with it, malice aforethought is, so basically your intention is either to kill or cause serious harm. But if you strip all that back, there's only 3 bits of it that are relevant, because we're talking about human beings and it's babies that have been born, etc. So it's unlawfully kills with the intention of causing serious harm or to kill. They're the only 3 things you need to know. So it's unlawful, it's not self-defense. Kills, your action resulted in the person's death, and you meant to kill them or you meant to cause them serious harm. When you strip it down, that's what you need to understand.
Well, that just clarifies a whole bunch of things. So, and your whole book is like that. It just really sets out so much stuff for us plebs who, not plebs, true crime enthusiasts, but with no actual training or profession linked to law enforcement.
But I know police officers that have read it have learned stuff from it. I learned writing it, so anybody picking it up can learn from it. What I didn't want to do, it's not a memoir. It's not about my career. It's not about me. And also, as well, what's important to me is, since I've started doing this, I don't want to talk about the cases that I investigated. So in the book, I talk about them, but I don't name the victims. I don't name the suspects. When I first left and I started to was finding my feet, I spoke a couple of times about some cases, and I just didn't like it. It felt like I was betraying like the trust people put in me to investigate their murders and their families' murders. So I've kind of taken the stance. I'll talk about them in general terms, but I won't go into any detail about the murders I investigated. And that's not to criticise. I know you got Colin on, and obviously he talks about some of the cases he was involved in. So I'm not criticising them. It's just a personal decision for me.
Just not right for you.
Yeah,
exactly. And then you also talked about something which I found really interesting as well, is that you were talking about how murder can also be an act as a result of omission of an act of duty of care.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really interesting, that you could be charged for murder for not doing anything.
Yeah. So if you imagine a doctor or a carer looking after somebody, and this person needs some attention, and if they don't get that attention, they'll die. If you intentionally hold that, there's a lot of shuns in there. If you intentionally hold back that attention, that's the same as actually doing an act. So an omission and an act are the same thing. I chose not to help that person, and because of that, they died. Then that's murder too.
just the implication there is that it's someone vulnerable in some capacity that's reliant on you to live. So that's just awful. Yeah. On a lighter note, it's a roller coaster, this podcast. I loved in your books the Did You Know sections, because we love a little fun fact on this show. And there's one that's just sticking with me that can't get out of my head. You mentioned, I'm going to pronounce it chimera.
Chimera, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Fantastic. You described it as having two sets of DNA in you, either because you've had like a bone marrow transplant. Does it count if you've had like a blood transfusion? Yeah,
it could be a blood transfusion. If someone else's DNA has got into your system in some way. So that can also be women who can, would it be ingest or whatever it is? So within the womb, they can take the DNA from their baby. Twins in the womb can take one from the other one. So yeah, there are various ways in which your body can end up. If we were to take a sample from you, it could be one of two DNA profiles that appear.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it's really rare.
But I was just wondering, have there ever been any cases where that has been an issue that you know of?
I had never heard of one. I think it's so rare, and I did a bit of research. And the only thing I could find is that one of the CSI programs used it as a storyline. Somebody committed a crime, but they were in prison. How could they have done that? And it turned out that was the reason.
Oh, well, if I ever find one, I will let you know. Because I love all the sciencey bits. I love when cold cases are solved with new developments in DNA analysis and all that kind of stuff.
Because the cases that we've covered, and each week we do a different case, Deanna's always really interested in that side. The investigations and procedures and things like that, DNA. And I'm always just interested in the psychology behind what makes people do these sorts of things. So yeah, that's how we sort of choose our cases.
Randa's a former teacher. She was a teacher for 12 years.
Yes, Steve, I used to work in law enforcement too.
I'd rather deal with criminals and teenagers, I've got to be honest.
Steve, I have been binging your YouTube channel, which I'm obsessed with. And I hope this is not too forward to say, but you just have one of the most soothing and reassuring voices I've ever heard. And you should absolutely use the ASMR hashtag in any content that you put out, because there are a lot of people who listen to true crime to be able to go to sleep at night.
I'm not sure how to take that. So listen to my YouTube channel if you want to go to sleep at night.
No, but not because it's boring, but because you just have the most soothing, I don't know, the frequencies of your voice. You just have the most soothing, reassuring voice to listen to. Aside from that, the content of what you talk about obviously fascinates us. And so your YouTube channel, it's called Murder Academy for those who want to check it out.
Links in the show notes.
Yeah, I was really interested in a lot of what you mentioned, but specifically the 5 steps and procedures you take when arriving at a crime scene. So yeah, can you outline those for us?
Yeah, so just to put it into context, when you go to a murder scene, people just think of detectives and police officers as like robots. So they switch on, they're going to go to a crime scene and deal with it, and everything's automatic. But it's not like that. Police officers are exactly the same as anybody else, and they will be nervous. They'll have adrenaline. They might be new. They might be stressed. When you go to a crime scene as a murder detective, you're generally turning up and it's really chaotic. There's lots going on. The police officers there, when you arrive, are like, oh, thank God you're here. You can take over and you can do the stressful decisions. It's not an easy thing just to turn up to a murder scene and just take over and deal with it. So quite often in the police, I say we, but it's not me anymore. But the way the procedure comes about is through mistakes. People get things wrong. So they put in place structure and procedures to help with that. And that's what this is. It's called the 5 building blocks. And it allows police officers to arrive at a crime scene and have a structure in their mind so that if it is stressful and there's lots going on and they're feeling that stress, they've got this to fall back on so they don't miss anything.
Like muscle memory.
Exactly, yeah. So you're maximising your chances of securing the evidence and minimising your chances of making mistakes. So it's 5 simple steps. So first one is preservation of life. That's the priority for all police officers in any situation. So you might think, well, I'm turning up to the murder scene. What has preservation of life got to do with me as a murder detective? But so, for instance, if you were to go into a house and there was a dead body in the living room, you've got to think, are there any more in the house? There was a sad case recently on the news of a family that were murdered. So you've got to think, right, are there any other victims? If those police officers haven't checked, we need to check it. Or suspects that have been stabbed and might be running away and they might be injured and collapsed, etc. So that's your first thought. Then it's securing of scene. So that's the cordon tape. And so if it's outside, you have an area that's cordoned off with the tape. And that's to ensure that everything within it there's nothing interfered with. So when the forensics and everything is done. This is one of the important ones when you turn up, because quite often you'd arrive and you have to make sure that they've put the cordon tapes in the right place, because I've been there. You turn up and it's at night and I've looked down and I'm walking in blood. And I'm like, I should not be walking in blood. I'm walking across. So I'd be like, let's widen it out. So you have to make sure that the cordons are in the right place. And another thing that happens as well is quite often you see a case where there's a dead body, but that's not where the actual incident took place, because if you've been stabbed, you can walk quite a far distance, you can run before you collapse. So you need to establish, well, where did the attack take place, etc. Are there any weapons or any other areas that need to be cordoned off? So that's securing of scene. Then securing of evidence. So that's things like witnesses. So people that are around there, if you don't get hold of them there and then, they could disappear and you'll never see them again. So make sure the witnesses are there. As I said, weapons. You're not dusting for fingerprints and doing blood pattern analysis and everything, but you're thinking of evidence that if I don't get a hold of it now, it could disappear. So you secure that. Right. And then 4 is identification of victim. So that's really important, because most murders, there's a connection between the victim and the suspect. As soon as you identify that, you can then start to make the inquiries to identify who the suspect is. And then the final one is identification and arrest of suspects. So the sooner you get hold of a suspect, the more evidence you're going to get on them. So if you arrest someone 5 minutes after they committed a murder, they're going to have potentially the victim's DNA on them, blood, murder weapon, anything they've stolen, their own phone, the clothing that they were wearing. But if you arrest them a month later, all that's gone. You've lost it all, or injuries they might have. So it's really important to get hold of a suspect as soon as possible. So they're the 5 steps. So it's preservation of life, preservation of scene, securing of evidence, identification of victim, identification of arrest of suspects. And if you follow those as a detective, you probably won't go far wrong.
Yeah, I was really interested in that, because it's something that just we would not ordinarily know about, and just knowing that there's a system that you follow even in those moments of chaos, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But also another thing we're interested in and terrified by in equal measures is the fact that, as you said, people are more likely to be murdered by somebody that they know.
So in my second book, I think I talk about one of the Jack the Ripper's victims, and there's a domestic violence issue there. And I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it was 9% of women in the UK where the suspect is known. Only 9% of those were killed by a stranger. And I think it's something like 48, 49%, something like that, are killed by their partner or ex-partner. So the reality and the perception, the reality is you're in much more danger in your own home than you are walking around on the street.
We're so sad that we didn't get to meet you in person, and we would have.
You were just following Colin around all the time, weren't you?
Oh, we can't deny. We can't confirm or deny.
He said to me at one point, we're in the toilet, and said, "Can you ever look outside? There's 2 girls with dark hair. When they've gone, can you tell me?"
He never said that. Our Colin would not say that.
He does not mind us fangirling over him at all.
We're being very respectful in this interview, because I have to say that in our Colin Sutton interview, it was a 1 hour of pure flirtation onslaught on that poor man.
I listened to it, so I know.
You are hunky too, Steve.
He took it well. He did take it well. He did take it well, in all fairness. I mean, Deanna's ready to be wifed up if Colin has a vacancy.
I'll move to, was it Norfolk? And, he's got like 5 dogs. I'll feed the dogs and clean their poop. It will just be such a happy life.
I'm just surprised we don't have a restraining order.
If anything happens to Mrs. Sutton, I know who they're going to be looking at first.
Oh my God. Someone clear my search history.
We've exposed ourselves for this podcast, because we're lucky that we're not in receipt of a lot of cease and desists and restraining orders. But anyway, Steve, back to you, because you are our special guest. Another thing we're interested in was the 3 categories of murder.
Yeah. So when I wrote this book, it started off as a completely different book and morphed into what it was. I was starting to write a book for a business, and it was how murders are investigated and the lessons from that can help your business type thing. And it was trying to be two different things. I thought I'll just write a book about how do you investigate murders. It's like, well, who's going to want to read that? And thought true crime fans. So I went to a couple of true crime Facebook groups and I just said, look, I'm writing this book. This is me. What would you like to know about murder? And the number one question, way ahead of anything else, was why do people kill? So I thought, well, I'm going to have to address that. I'll look at it. Obviously, I understand motive and etc. But what I was trying to do is understand. We know all the different motives, and you could come out with 50 different motives. But is there a link between them? Is there a pattern? And I've got quite an analytical mind, so I was like determined if there is one, I'd find it. And then I had this bit of a light bulb moment, and it was what essentially we do is we try and we make murder as if it's some sort of special category of why people choose to do things, but in essence it's just an act, and it's illegal and all the ramifications that come with it, but it's still an act that human beings choose to do. And as human beings, we're only motivated to act by one of three things. It's what we're feeling, what we want to feel, and the benefit we're going to get from it. So if you think of any act you choose to do, you're doing it because of one. It could be more than one, but it'd be one of those three things because of what you're feeling, what you want to feel, and the benefit you get. So I apply that to murder, and I come up with these three categories of push of emotion, pull of emotion, and gain. So push of emotion would be revenge, jealousy, anger, disrespect. If you feel something inside you that triggers, something's happened, it's triggered emotions inside of you that are so intense that you go and hurt someone and kill them. That's a push of emotion. So you can dump all those categories, all those bits, all those types of motive in there. Then you've got pull of emotion, and that is, I want to feel something, but in order for me to feel it, I have to hurt you and kill you. And that could be power, control, sexual gratification, fun, whatever it is. I want to feel something, I have to hurt you to do it. And then the final one is gain, so robbery or terrorism, where you're furthering your cause. So the gain doesn't have to be for you, so it can be for you or somebody else, but you're doing something because you want to achieve something, you want to gain something for you or someone else. Any murder you can think of, it will go in there. So and essentially what we end up doing, it becomes semantics, because if you think of this situation where somebody comes home from work early and they go up to the bedroom and they find their partner in bed with somebody else, and in a rage they kill them both. Now, what is that a rage of? Is it a rage of jealousy, anger, betrayal, whatever it is? Some emotion's been triggered inside them, and as a result have killed them. And even if you sat down with that person and you asked them, well, what emotion were you feeling? They probably wouldn't even be able to label it themselves. All they would know is I felt intense, and they might label it, but it's a guess. And that's what we're doing. So essentially what we're trying to, I say it's semantics. We're trying to label emotions, and you can't always do that. It's something someone feels inside of them, but it makes us feel more comfortable by labeling it. If we're just going to say, well, it was an emotion. Well, what emotion? But as a murder investigator, I don't need to whittle it down to what emotion it was. All I need to understand was, in that situation, they come across this being cheated on. It triggered emotion within them, and because of that, they killed someone. That's all you really need to understand. So when I look at murder now, it's really quite simple. Someone's committed it either because of what they feel, what they want to feel, or the benefit they're going to get from it. And you just strip away all the labels that people try and put on it, and it will always come back to one of those three things, unless it's someone who's suffering from real severe mental illness,
like psychosis or something.
Yeah, if you're not in control and you're detached from reality, then you can't really class that as a motive, can you?
Yeah, it just clarifies so much, and obviously humans are so complex. You make it sound simple. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that to work all these things out, but it must be super helpful to have like a framework to try to help understand.
Yeah, I think it is simple. And the people that, not everyone would agree with me, this is my theory, but the people that don't want to make it more complicated, then they will come out with environmental or their childhood or psychopathy and all this. But all of those factors contribute to why someone might not be able to control their emotions, but nobody kills because they're a psychopath. So there are lots of psychopaths around who don't go killing people, but a psychopath might be less inclined to think about the consequences or be able to control themselves. So that might mean they're more likely to kill, but that's not the reason they kill.
Gotcha. You also worked in terrorism as well. So when I was reading your book, it was really interesting to read about the laws of detention and investigation of people suspected of terrorism, because it's slightly different, isn't it, to other crimes, in that in other crimes, you explained that you can have basically up to 4 days if you apply for different petitions from courts and so forth.
Yeah.
And with terrorism, suspected terrorists, it's 14 days.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, in both cases, is that enough? Is that a lot of pressure on you? Do you think it's good? Do you think it needs reviewing? I don't know.
So there's a balance between, if you ask a police officer, is it enough time? They'll say, well, I'd like more. But not everybody that's arrested. And it's actually quite a low percent. I don't know what the figures are now, but I remember when I was on the anti-terrorist branch in 2000, between 2002 2005, we arrested a lot of people under the Terrorism Act. And there was a small percentage that actually were charged with offences. But we could keep them in custody for up to 14 days. And I think it went up to 28 days at one point, but then came back down again.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I travel back home a lot to Palestine. And this is another thing that I got from reading your book, Murder Investigation Team. And you don't have to comment on this if you don't want to, Steve, but I'm happy to. As a Palestinian, how you are treated by the Israeli customs, army, police, and so forth does not follow any kind of procedure like you've explained in your book. People don't introduce themselves to you when they hold you at the airport. Like, I've been detained for like 8-9 hours and so forth at the airport just because I want to go home. I have nothing in my background apart from being Palestinian that would raise any concerns. They don't introduce themselves to you when they start interrogating you, which already sounds like a little thing, but I'm sure you understand from investigations that's really puts you on the back foot. You have no idea who you're even talking to, what department they're from, none of that. They also don't explain why you're being held. They don't explain why they're questioning you. They ask you questions over and over again. They ask you questions that seem completely irrelevant. And, you know, you can be strip searched by males if you're female and stuff like that. And you're not allowed to contact your lawyer or the consulate or your embassy or your parents who are sitting at home freaking out, you know, all of this sort of stuff. So one thing I will say is that you made it clear that in theory, and most of the time in practice, the system is very decent and humane and based on innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. It should be, shouldn't it? It should be that, and the danger is that where does that lead? Those in authority have to be accountable for the actions that they take, and sometimes when you're in the position and you're investigating a crime, you can feel this is getting in the way. But then you just have to think, well, what if it was me on the other side? Would I want a lawyer representing me? Would I want the right to silence? Would I want all the safety procedures that are in and around somebody that's in custody so that I don't get a kick in? I think that's, as a civilized society, that's what we should be.
Because there are obviously very clear cases. We just covered the Colin Stagg, Rachel Nicholl, horrendous. And, you know, there's a case of someone who was innocent, who was hounded by the media in particular. But yeah, I mean, there are cases where you can become a suspect and you really haven't done anything.
And I talk about the book about confirmation. Do I mention
confirmation bias?
Do I mention that case? I think I do, don't I?
You mentioned it on your YouTube channel, and you talked about confirmation bias as well.
Yeah. So confirmation bias is probably the worst thing you can have as a detective, because essentially what it is, you're looking for information to support an idea that you've already formed, and that's what they did with Colin Stagg from the criminal profile that was produced by what's his name,
Paul Britton.
Paul Britton. They'd already made their mind up. This weirdo who hangs around in this area, it must be him. So what we're going to do, we're going to go all out and get information to make sure, so we know we're right. We're going to prove we're right, and that's not how you should investigate a murder. You should be seeking the truth, and the truth might not be what you want to hear, but you need to seek the truth. And it's not your job to play judge and jury. A job as a police officer and a detective is to gather the information to put before other people to make that decision at court. And if you lose sight of that, that's when those mistakes happen.
And again, police officers are human, so it's quite useful, again, to have these like frameworks to fall back on. Yeah.
So the hypotheses, I talk about hypotheses in the book, where you set out. So when police form hypotheses, they came in the news recently with Nicola Bulley. Police don't normally talk about them. They don't normally publicly say these are our hypotheses, but they did for that case. And they're a really important way of investigating a murder where you don't fall down that trap of, I'm going after this one person and we're doing everything to catch them. You have to have a 2, 3, 4, you can have as many as you like running at the same time. And until the others are eliminated, you always have to have that in your mind. Right. So if for instance, you were investigating Rachel Nickell and you were looking at Colin Stagg, well, what if it's not him? What if it's somebody else? And sadly, in that case, if they'd followed that, they may well have got to Robert Napper, who then wouldn't have killed
Samantha Bissett
and a child, in Plumstead. So by not following those procedures, you end up with someone not guilty being persecuted, and potentially, I'm not saying this is 100% the case, but potentially a young mother and a child dying later on unnecessarily.
Yeah, that was an awful case. But we covered a case recently, Liz Goliar and Carrie Farver. It was really, really, really creepy one. Remember, Randa?
Yes, I do.
But it was really interesting because a lady went missing and it was a cold case. And then the cold case team, there was 2 police officers, and one followed the hypothesis that this woman was still alive and one followed the hypothesis that she was dead. And they went off on separate paths to do the investigation. And I just found that really interesting. So yeah, keeping your options open, I suppose. And
yeah,
because otherwise you run the risk of dismissing. The Colin Stagg one was so awful because they dismissed such crucial evidence because it didn't fit into this idea that it was Colin Stagg at the end.
Yeah. So in my new book, where I'm writing about Jack the Ripper, if you follow the Jack the Ripper stories, books, theories, etc., every single theory you ever see about who Jack the Ripper is, people are doing exactly that. They're picking bits and making it fit with their suspect and dismissing other things. And that's not how detectives work. It's not a case of, right, I've got my idea, I'm going to prove myself right. I know it sounds like it's cliche, but it's a search for the truth. That's what you're looking to do.
Yeah, with the suspects of the Jack the Ripper case, which we'll talk about, it's like for each person that's come up, there's just as much evidence that they've done it as they haven't done it. And yeah, like you say, it's just let's just ignore that bit that disproves our theory.
Yeah. So I talk about that in the book in terms of how you relate that to modern day criminal trials. So essentially, if you get a book and you write, your whole book is to persuade people that this person is Jack the Ripper. What you're essentially doing is you're presenting the evidence for the prosecution and asking people to convict that person just on the evidence of the prosecution with no evidence from the defense, because they don't want to do that, because they want to persuade you that this is the suspect, and they want to ignore the things that says that they're not. And imagine if our criminal justice system worked like that. There'd be how many innocent people would be convicted. Do you know what I mean? So that's not how you should approach judging someone's guilt.
No. There's also one theory that it's the Freemasons, isn't it? Or that the Freemasons help cover up one of their own, blah, blah, blah. One of my clients is a charity and the Freemasons give quite a bit of money to them. And so I got invited along to do a talk, and I went to dinner with them afterwards, and the dinner was massively delayed. And I remember one of the guys saying, and people think we were smart enough to cover up Jack the Ripper. We can't even organize a piss up in a brewery. It did make me laugh. Sorry, I did raise the issue of terrorism in your time on there. And we're just wondering, are there any long-term impacts as a result of the 7/7 bombing, either, within law enforcement or society?
Yeah, there's loads. I mean, so from a policing perspective, so when I joined the anti-terrorist branch, it was 2002, and it was just after 9/11. So we were just entering sort of more Islamic terrorism from the Irish terrorism. So when we got trained on how to deal with bomb scenes, what they did was they took us to a big army base somewhere, blew up a car, and we had to treat that scene as if it was a real scene, and all the procedures you go through there. But when the 7/7 happened, it was a completely different scenario. I mean, we were completely unprepared, and we were flying by the seat of our pants, if you like. We were making stuff up as we were going along because we're having to adapt what we'd learned and what our procedures were to suddenly there's a suicide bomber on a packed rush hour London Underground, and not just one, there's 3, and on a bus as well. So to really adapt in how we work. So now I think we're better prepared, or I'd hope we would be, in the lessons learned. Although the one in Manchester, obviously there were issues there. So whether that learning is nationwide or it's just in London. And also as well, one of the things you fear about the police is they learn and then they forget. And that's one thing that you hope doesn't happen, that you forget the lessons that you learn. If you relate it back to reasons people kill, why do people do anything? What the 7/7 did, it was a trigger of emotion in people. And when people feel intense emotion, they act and they do things that they wouldn't normally do. So that might be hitting out at people because they look different to me. Do you know what I mean? That's people act and they do things under emotion, and also as well the coming together as well. That has brought us together. Why have we chosen to come together? Because the emotions evoked from 7/7. Anything like that is always going to have positives and negatives resulting from it.
Yeah. And sorry, Dee?
Go on, you go ahead.
No, go for it.
No, I forgot what I was going to say already.
Don't fight.
It's such a difficult job for Paul editing our podcast because we interrupt each other constantly.
Yeah. Also, he's just come off the back of editing a bunch of episodes where you had a really bad cough, and he was like,
I did.
I hope that's cleared up by this episode.
Sorry, Paul. So annoying. But as we said before, we're really interested in the behavioral traits of people who do bad things and the psychology behind it. And what I'm always interested in is, because of your professional experience, do you notice things in people that ordinary civilians like us don't pick up on, like subtle nuances and behavioral traits? Because I remember actually in one of your YouTube talks, you mentioned that you cannot rely only on intuition and that facts still reign strong. But what do you do if you get a hunch or a feeling about somebody and you notice these sort of nuanced behaviors and you know that they're capable of doing bad things, but they haven't actually committed a crime yet? What can you do with that information?
I suppose it depends on the situation. So for me, the first question was, do you
pick up on behavioral traits that the rest of us don't notice? Yeah.
My expression is I can spot a wrong and a mile off. My partner's in the police, my daughter's in the police, my son is.
Wow.
Like my friends are. So when you're with them, you both do it. You both end up focusing in on the same person because they give off vibes of.
Are you like at the pub with your wife going, psychopath? Psychopath.
Are you able to ever switch it off?
No, because it's just who you are, isn't it? If you're, I suppose as well, I was a police officer for 30 years and I'm only 51 now. So 3/5 of my life, I've been looking for wrong-uns, and you can't just switch that off, can you? And also it's a defense mechanism, isn't it? So we're always on the lookout for people that could harm us in any way. So I don't think I'll ever switch that off.
So what sort of traits are we talking about? What do you notice that the rest of us might not? The little subtleties.
It's a really difficult one to say because it's not verbal? Always.
Is it body language or is it primarily verbal?
Yeah, it's how they're acting, what they look like, what they're wearing, the car they drive.
Audi drivers.
They're the worst. Them and hatchback drivers.
Apologies if you have an Audi, Steve.
So I'll tell you what I found really interesting listening to your interview with Colin was the stark difference between how I ended up in the police and where we ended up. And we took people might lump us together as we're both old murder detectives, but actually we had completely different upbringings in completely different areas. We joined the police for different reasons. Within the police, we had different experiences. So I grew up on council estates in South London, and I ended up policing where I went to school. So I was nicking people I went to school with, and I was stopping them in cars and whatever.
Awkward.
Yes and no, because they were just people in my, like if you got your friends and then you got people that happened to be in your year, they might have been in my year, they weren't my friends. But what it did was I always felt like I had a bit of an advantage because I understood the people I was policing, and I don't like to go around sort of down the racial route. But for me, I'm a white boy from South London, so I would pick on white boys from South London because I could spot them a mile off because I was like, I know what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I saw someone in the car, I'd be like, if it wasn't someone I knew, they reminded me of someone I knew. Do you know what I mean?
That's how Miss Marple catches people. Sorry, big Agatha Christie fan, but she's like, oh, I knew it was him because he reminded me of Mr. Blah, blah, blah from The Village who cheated on his wife or whatever. So yeah, you're using Miss Marple techniques there.
And I don't want to go, I don't really want to get dragged down this route of what I'm about to say, but in terms of, I really honestly believe that police should reflect the society it polices.
Yeah.
Like our politicians.
Sure. Yeah. So then I went to work. So that was where I grew up, and I went there. Then later on, I went to work in Peckham in South London, which was a different demographic. And
so where did you start off? Where in South London are you
Greenwich. From? For me, then, to go from an area where I knew the people and I grew up with them to an area that hadn't grown up in, I found that harder because I suddenly, my automatic being able to spot a wrong and a mile off was, well, I don't know these people as well as I know the people I grew up with. So
yeah,
if there's debate as to whether police officers should be posted to places they grew up in, but surely it must be beneficial to you and the people you work with if you've got that already, got that connection and you know them. And
I agree with you. I do agree with you. I taught in a local borough I live in the Hounslow borough in Chiswick, and I taught in the Ealing borough, which is the fourth most ethnically diverse borough in the whole of the UK. And actually, I think I was hired on the basis of they needed to tick the ethnic minority box. To be fair, there was a lot of questions about that in my interview. But I actually found it really interesting, and I found my background definitely applicable to kids who were from similar backgrounds, refugee backgrounds, and things like that. Also, yeah, multicultural backgrounds. So I agree with you. I see the value in that, definitely.
Yeah.
So from now on, Randa and I are refusing to be governed or policed by anyone except Belgian Palestinians. Because we are half Belgian, half Palestinian.
There might be one or two somewhere, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're talking to them. Well, on that note, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in a moment.
So we're back from our break, and we have another question for you, Steve. So is there a case that you still think about, even after leaving the police force?
No, not really, I don't think. No. Are you thinking like in a way that sort of I carry it with me?
Yeah, that you still think about it still haunts you, or that's unresolved.
The only cases that I really do carry with me, if you like, are the ones that involve children. Like, for instance, postmortems. I've been to so many postmortems. I can't recall in my mind being there and seeing it and what. But with the children, I do. Like, I'll always remember those children laying there, and that's something I'll always, or the crime scenes and stuff. I think that's the only one I'll always carry with me. I think maybe because of as being a parent and stuff, and yeah, I got used to dead bodies and I got used to murder, but I never got used to seeing dead children. In my book, I talk about young Daniel who got stamped to death by his uncle, and for nothing more than wetting the bed. And the pathologist wouldn't believe us when I described the situation of where the body was found, etc. He said like, he's been thrown out of a first floor window or run over by a car.
Oof.
No, he hasn't. It was in his bedroom, and then it just basically stamped him to death. And the injuries he caused were equivalent of that. And it was literally just for wetting the bed. And those kinds of things, yeah. I mean, in a way, I'm glad, because if I'd become so immune to things, and I could see that and not be affected in any way, then I'll probably be more worried about what was going on inside me.
And actually, interestingly, I listened to the podcast episode that was your live talk at CrimeCon with Stuart of British Murderers podcast. Oh, yeah. And you were critical of the mental health support offered to police officers. So have things improved on that front? Yeah,
so things have definitely changed. So in 2005, I was on the anti-terrorist branch, which is a very blokey man unit. Few women on there, but mostly men. And where I was on the underground at Edgware Road, we were all men down there dealing with that scene. And when we'd finished, they were in a room, and someone come out and said, like, who would like counselling? And
that bit made me laugh, actually.
Yeah, who's gonna put their hand up?
The way you described it, that asked a room full of men, are you okay?
Put their hand up? They're not, are they? So it was really poor, and I know at least a couple that really affected, and at least one that I was aware of ended up leaving the police. It was definitely as a direct result of what happened at 7/7. And then the last case that I investigated when I left the police on the murder teams was Matt Ratana, the police officer that got shot in the custody. I don't know if it's been in the news at the moment. And the stark difference between then and that case, where they didn't just ask us once, and in that kind of environment where you couldn't accept it, they asked us time and time again on email, in person, via our bosses, do you want counselling? It's available to you. You can contact us here, all that kind. And so it massively moved on, and police officers' mental health and well-being is a factor now when these things happen, whereas before it was an afterthought.
Well, that's reassuring that it's improved on that front, because actually we were interested in how many detectives actually make it to retirement, the official retirement age.
Well, it's changed actually. So when I first joined, you did a 30-year career, you did 30 years and you got your pension, and then the government come along and said, no, that costs us too much money. So now you got to work till you're 60. So, for instance, both my children are in the police, both joined at 19. So they've got a 41-year career, which blows my mind, 41 years. So I think as a result of that, people now will come into the police and are much more likely to leave and go and do other careers. Whereas when I joined, it was actually, I remember when on a few occasions where people did say, I'm leaving, it like, why would you? Why would you go and do something else? We've got our pension to look forward to, etc. But my generation, very few would drop out. And as now, my children's generation, there'll be many more people that won't make it to retirement.
Wow. I mean, such an intense profession. I talked already a little bit about how I love when cold cases are solved, either because of developments in the scientific field or whatever.
Yeah.
You talk about in your book, Murder Investigation Team, about the 3 different ways that cold cases are solved, either advances in science, new witnesses, or deficiencies in the previous investigation, things that they've missed or so forth. I just wondered, what is your favorite cold case that has been solved?
So that I've solved?
That you've solved would be even better, but in general, if you prefer.
Yeah, so when the Metropolitan Police have a unit that deals with those old cases. So when we got them in London, I can only talk about London, no murder is ever, if it's not solved, it's never put away and never looked at again. They're reviewed all the time. So what would happen as a murder team? You get a file would come to you, and you'd have to look at it. And it's going to be one of those 3 ways. You're going to review what they've done before in the past. Have they missed something? Could they have followed up this lead, etc.? What new sciences are available to us, particularly around DNA, but also ways of fingerprints potentially, or phone evidence? Or are there witnesses we haven't spoken to before? Or can we go and speak to the old witnesses and their loyalties have changed? They might be more likely to speak to us now, whereas in the past they might have been closer to the suspect. So they're the 3 ways that you're going to do it. I suppose for me, it wouldn't be one specific, but I'm always interested to read about cases from 20, 30, 40 years ago, particularly when it's involving children. And the suspect has now been caught and identified. They're now an old man. I always find that really quite satisfying, the fact that no matter how long it took, that person's going to get justice at some point. But for me personally, I never had one of those sort of cases. They never came to our team. But yeah, they are fascinating, aren't they, cold cases?
Oh, they're amazing. I'll tell you which one stuck with me from CrimeCon, though, the David Fuller one.
Yeah.
Because I really felt for, they had the family liaison officer and the lead detective on the panel. And, they must have had some, I don't know whether joy or whatever, but maybe satisfaction of identifying who had killed these 2 women.
Yeah.
I think it was 30 years previously. But sadly, that led to them discovering something entirely different.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just chilling.
My daughter was at that one. I think she said she cried at one point.
I'm not surprised, because it was horrendous. For those who don't know, there's a documentary, I think it's called The Monster in the Morgue, on Sky TV or Now TV.
Oh, God.
What they found was that this guy had been working as an electrician in the hospital, which meant he had full access to the whole hospital. And he'd murdered 2 women in the 80s, never been caught. Some developments in the DNA analysis meant that they managed to trace him through familial DNA, I think. And when they went to arrest him, they found on his hard drives all of these photos of him basically sexually abusing about 101 bodies in the morgue. And the police on that panel were talking about the process of trying to identify these victims and just the operation of getting all these 150 family liaison officers together in one place. They didn't tell them what they were there for, so that they could tell them all at once what was involved, and then send them on their way to tell all the family members at the same time, so no one found out through different ways. It was just horrendous. So that was one cold case that I didn't enjoy because of everything that came out as a result. But yeah, also very fascinating.
So, Steve, I'm sure our listeners are going to want to stalk you after listening to this episode.
Research you. I call it Disney stalking, Disney stalking.
It's cute, harmless.
If you're looking at stuff that people have voluntarily put on the internet about themselves, then it's Disney stalking, right?
Yeah. If there's someone in the bush outside your house, that's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you run background checks on us, by the way, before coming on?
Because nothing will come out.
If you're good enough for Colin, you're good enough for me.
Oh, thank you. For our listeners, I'm sure they would love to know what you're up to. You've talked about your book, and we will be putting the links to your book when it comes out and telling people how they can find it. But yeah, can you just tell us what are you up to these days and how can people find you? Yeah,
so my YouTube channel is I've kind of taken a step back from it. So the videos are still there and you can see them, but I'm not putting up anything new at the moment. I'm probably not going to.
But we're working on you to get a podcast.
Yeah.
People eventually say yes to our ideas, so it just depends how much time and effort you want to put in resisting it.
So I'm kind of taking the summer off at the moment because writing a book it just takes up all your mental capacity, and so I'm having a little bit of a break because I haven't really had one since I retired. I've just rolled straight into all the bits I was doing. I've got a couple of projects coming up, and I hate when people say this kind of thing. I can't talk about them. But I've got a couple of projects coming up that are exciting, but they're just sort of in the pipeline at the moment. And then suppose when my book comes out, there's quite a lot of publicity you got to do around that, and podcasts and some TV stuff and bits and bobs. I'm at a bit of a lull at the moment, but an intentional one.
A well-deserved and well-earned one, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then we start again in September. I'll start again. It'll probably get intense again after that. But yeah, you can find me on YouTube. Do you know that my favorite social media platform isn't really the normal one, but it's LinkedIn?
Do you know what? I'm a big advocate for LinkedIn, and that's how we got in touch.
Yeah,
and I'm a big advocate for it. And I'm a social media manager since leaving teaching, and I offer training on LinkedIn and LinkedIn management. And I have been banging that drum for so long, trying to convince people that LinkedIn is where it's at. If you want some substantial conversations,
100%.
If you're a business owner and you want actual leads, or you want to build your personal branding, or you want to have actual substantial conversations, get on LinkedIn. You don't even have to make all these reels and stuff. It's primarily copy-based platform. And yeah, I'm a big advocate for it.
It's so organic, isn't it? Like it just, because people can see your connections, can see what you're commenting on. And I think most of the work I've got is through LinkedIn, where people just approach you and say, since I've left the police, the way I'm positioning myself, I sound poncy when I say things like this, but the way I'm positioning myself in terms of who I want to be is an expert on murder who's educating people in what it's really like. Because it's not, for me, it's not about glorifying what I did. It's about so people understanding, well, actually, what's the truth behind murder investigation? Why do we do what we do? How do we catch people, and that kind of thing? And so I put posts on LinkedIn around that and about my new book and whatnot. And it just generates so many leads of people saying, I found that really interesting. Would you consider this type thing? Whereas if I go on Instagram, it kind of just feels like I'm just shouting at clouds and no one's
talking into the abyss. I'm with you on that 100%, and that's exactly why I went and did training with 5 different LinkedIn experts, because I have to obsess over things and learn them inside out. And yeah, LinkedIn is a very underrated platform, but absolutely one that I think people should be on.
Yeah,
and thank God, because that's how we started chatting.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got one of these winging its way to you.
Oh, have I?
Yeah. Well, not yet.
I was going to say, how did you get my address?
We have our ways.
You can do what Colin did and send me a corporate address as agent or something.
A P.O. box.
I'll leave it up to you. Or I can leave it somewhere for you to collect.
To be fair, I'm confident you're not going to come and sit outside my house. Colin might not think the same.
I'm actually incredibly lazy.
I mean, anyone that knows London, east to west or south to west, going anywhere in London, it's like you might as well cross the channel.
Yeah. I mean, is there parking at your house?
Is it zone 1?
Well, Steve, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. We're so excited. Are you going to CrimeCon in Glasgow?
I should be, yeah. I've been invited, but I just need to confirm it around a project I've got going on at that time. But yeah, hopefully.
I'm going to be there too.
Oh, brilliant.
Randa can't make it, but this time we have to meet.
I like CrimeCon at London, but like CrimeCon at Glasgow's got a completely different feel about it because it's one stage. So everybody sees everything. It's much more smaller. It's more intimate. It's a different vibe, and I really enjoyed Glasgow.
CrimeCon London was amazing, but there were like 4 different rooms.
Yeah,
and there were times where I literally wanted to go see all 4 things, and there were some times where I got so flustered I couldn't pick between them that I just ended up going to none of them because I got overwhelmed. Because like I said, I spend a lot of time spent sitting at home. Podcasters, we're shy, retiring people, except when you put a mic in front of us. So yeah, I would have wanted to go to every single talk.
Yeah. So fingers crossed, I'll see you there.
Oh, you will, because I will find you.
I mean, it's been honestly our greatest honor and privilege that you agreed to come on the podcast, and you have been so much fun to speak to.
No, it's actually my pleasure. Honestly, it really is my pleasure. Thank you.
And best of luck for the book. And we are going to be keeping our listeners updated on all your future activities. Professional ones, not like he's left his house. I think he's going picking up his kids from school.
And thank God for your YouTube channel so that we can still get our fix. So Steve Fix. Loved every second. Yeah, and I didn't even listen to you on double speed. I normally have to do that so I don't get bored, but I did not. I listened to you in your normal speed.
I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a great day. And thank you so much. And thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Hey there. Thanks for being a loyal listener.
Do you need a new website or want to boost your social media performance? Or do you hate podcast editing? You've tried optimizing your website and social media channels, but you're still not getting the listeners, downloads, and engagement you want?
We, the Safier sisters, love helping people with tasks that they hate. We know a thing or two about podcasts, websites, and social media, and we love working with other podcasters and business owners.
So why not head over to switchbladesisterssocialclub.com and go to our Work With Us section. We believe in collaboration over competition. A rising tide raises all ships.
Bye!